Good morning and a very warm welcome to our event on inclusive early warning systems. My name is Elina Väänänen and I will be moderating today's event, which is organized by the MDB Working Group on Adaptation Finance. Today we'll be talking about early warning systems that identify and alert populations about impending hazards. We all know that early warning systems are one of the most cost-effective and effective adaptation solutions, and yet still over a third of the global population is not covered by one. As we'll hear from our speakers, early warning systems are only effective if they're acted upon, and that really points to a need for them to be inclusive of the needs and the differences of the people they serve. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to our illustrious panel and ask them to introduce themselves and, as a little bit of an icebreaker, give us one key ingredient or characteristic of an inclusive early warning system. In no more than 3 words, and if you're really up for the challenge, in 1 word. So I'll turn to Erica first.
Hello, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Erica Alice, and I work at the World Meteorological Organization, and I lead the partner engagement and also member engagement and coordination in the Early Warnings for All initiative. And in terms of my few words, I believe it would be meaningful and actionable.
Okay. My name is Alhamdu Dorsuma. I'm the manager of the Climate and Green Growth Division at the African Development Bank. And I'm replacing a colleague, James Kinyangi, who is coordinating an important initiative at the bank called ClimDev Special Fund, which is supporting the modernization of weather and climate services in Africa. So, few words, I think, for us, the most important thing is how to modernize and enhance the capabilities of weather stations in Africa in order to support the early warning agenda, because we believe that early warning and especially early actions are critical for adaptation, which is Africa's priority on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Asmita Tiwari, lead climate change specialist with the World Bank. I've been working on a number of disaster risk management projects, grants, looking at early warning system for the last 15 years in different regions of the bank. Happy to be here. Accessible and effective for all. That's how I would like to describe inclusive warning system. Thanks.
Good morning, I'm Nena Stojljković, Undersecretary General in International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. I'm in charge of partnerships and global humanitarian diplomacy in IFRC. For me, it's great to be here this morning with colleagues from multilateral development banks, given that before IFRC, I worked for 25 years in the private sector arm of the World Bank. I have 2 words, or maybe it can pass as 1 word, locally led.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Nyinguro. I work at the Kenya Meteorological Department, currently working in the Climate Change Office, and coordinate the work of the IPCC for Kenya in my country. I also support the implementation of early warning within the Meteorological Department, and I'll take you up on the challenge for 1 word, co-production.
Thank you ever so much. We'll come back to those adjectives and maybe also hear from our audience what they think. We'll go now to a round of targeted questions to our panelists. And first, I'd like to turn to Erica. WMO and UNDRR are leading the Early Warnings for All initiative, along with IFRC and a number of other partners. Early Warning for All has a very ambitious goal of ensuring that everyone on Earth is protected by early warnings by 2027. Could you tell us a little bit more about how the partners are approaching this crucial challenge?
Great, thank you. And I think it's important to note that even though WMO and UNDRR are working on this and co-leading it, we really need and are engaged with a number of other partners. So in terms of the Pillar 1, We have UNDRR who's leading on the risk analysis, and this is really crucial in terms of identifying the different levels of vulnerability in communities so that we can better tailor the messages that would be going out as part of early warning systems. So WMO is leading on Pillar 2, which is forecasting and observations. And I think this is something that we've been working on for 150 years in terms of coordinating the international exchange of data and producing models. And we're finding that we have very good coverage in terms of models, but we would like to see how we can actually work better within the different regional centers to ensure that the countries are able to downscale these models and also able to take the messages and with partners work to package and enable more effective messaging for these. So really meeting the community level and with targeted, actionable messaging. In terms of the Pillar 3, which is being led by ITU, we're really working with them in terms of cell broadcast and how we can actually leverage this to ensure that people are automatically receiving messages in a number of different ways. And in addition to that, we're also looking at how, from a community-led perspective, how we can engage also through the Red Cross, who's leading, IFRC is leading Pillar 4, how we can actually engage in the community, because I believe that really the first responders and the people that are able to really act and provide support are your neighbors. So we're really looking at how we can work within those at the national level and the local level to enable actionable and effective early warning systems.
Thank you very much. And that gives us a little bit of a value chain of the early warning systems process. Moving from that to Patricia and your experience very much doing this on the ground, pioneering work in bringing early warning and weather information to informal settlements in an initiative which is about bridging communities and building bridges, as the name of the initiative in Swahili, Daraja. Could you tell us a little bit about this experience and what's needed to do that and involve some of the users and local communities in that process?
Yeah, definitely. So at the Meteorological Department, we realized there was a disconnect between the providers of information and the users of that information. So we would put out very good forecasts, put them on social media, send them as emails, but they were not really reaching the actual people who would need them. So in Kenya, in Nairobi, for example, a lot of people have smartphones and are able to access information from the internet. So we thought that would be one way that we could leverage social media and also just maybe WhatsApp or messaging services to enable us to reach the last mile people. There are also a number of informal settlements within the country and within the main urban cities, and these people are faced by challenges that people not in informal settlements do not encounter. So because the building materials in the informal settlements are, for example, iron sheets, when the temperature rises just a little bit, they experience extreme heat, whereas in other parts of the city, they do not. And so we worked with the members of the informal settlement to kind of delineate the thresholds for which heat becomes unbearable for them. And flooding, for example, also when flooding becomes unbearable and they lose lives. And so we worked with them iteratively, and we were able to design products specifically for them that would be different from what the rest of the Nairobians would receive. So we brought them, had a meeting with the specific representatives, did questionnaires, asked them how they would like the information to be delivered to them, what is the most effective way. And finally, we were able to recognize that using champions, that local people within the community, who the community already trusts, helps us to be able to get that information to them the best way possible. So we started developing new products, and then we would convert them into very short messages that we would send on WhatsApp to these particular champions. The champions would rally the people. So in case we expect flooding to occur, we would send a message in advance. Then they would rally the people and, for example, clear drainages. And that way we were able to see a direct impact. So there was reduction in the number of people who would die from flooding within the informal settlements. And also for heat, we would be able to provide the information in advance, and they would put interventions in place to enable them to avoid that. And so by doing that, we were able to get that information to them earlier in a more effective way, and we saw the impact directly. So now we are currently working on scaling this up to the more informal settlements that we have in the country. And unfortunately, this was a project-funded initiative. So as with most projects, it comes to an end. So we are currently also exploring ways to continue to provide these services to them, independent of any project funding.
Wonderful example, and I think it really goes to the heart of the themes today, and your adjective of locally led and also a very tailored example there. Thank you so much for that. Asmita, turning to you, the World Bank supports early warning systems through a number of programs, the GFDRR, the CRUISE initiative. Given your very vast operational experience, could you tell us a little bit how you see the challenges and opportunities for advancing the early warning agenda?
Thank you so much. We all know that disasters affect people differently. So those people who are most vulnerable, they are affected the most. And they are in this kind of a vicious cycle where, they are recovering from one disaster, the other one strike, and that really pushes them back socially and economically. So the inclusive and robust early warning system is really important for building resilience of communities, especially most vulnerable communities. So when the next disaster strikes, they know what to do. They can get the information in time, they can act on time and reduce harm. So the inclusive early warning system really involves taking care, understanding the abilities and needs of distinct group of people that the warning is serving. I will give an example of Sri Lanka project where we are investing in early warning system. Here, the Sri Lanka has more persons of disability compared to other countries in the region. Sorry about that. And then there are also an aging population. So looking at that, the project really is investing in 4 areas. One, providing actionable warning. So it's not just that it's going to rain tomorrow, but it's really about so-and-so area might get inundated by so much depth, so people can take actions. Providing messages in local languages in different audio-visual way, so it's more accessible to people. Using all platforms, TV, sirens, etc., and really working with them in advance so they know what to do when they get warning. Now, coming to the challenges part, there are 3 key areas of challenges and opportunities. One is investment. We are seeing that there is a growing attention and investment in early warning system. Within the World Bank itself, within the last decade, the investment in hydromet and early warning system has grown from 300 million to 1.3 billion this year. We are working across 120 projects in all regions of the bank. We are part of the Early Warning for All initiative in 14 countries as a part of phase 1. Second key area is institutional coordination. I mean, this is at the heart of providing warning in time and inclusively. And it really involves the coordination of different agencies, hydromet, disaster response, public outreach. And it's very difficult for them to come together, make sure that they can share information and work together. It's a long-term commitment and long-term engagement. Finally, it's about innovation. And there's a lot of opportunities to really build on new technologies which have come up, the global data which is available, building on the traditional knowledge and network which exists in a community. And we are already seeing a number of innovation, for example, in Haiti with GFDRR support, EU support. There is involvement of musicians and other platforms to target youth and women for hurricane preparedness. We have seen wonderful examples from Bangladesh and India where early warning is saving lives. So there is a lot that has happened over the last 2 years, and I think now is the time to gather more momentum and provide warning for all. Thank you.
So much, and we'll maybe come back to the investment perspective and hear from others as well on where you see the biggest needs. Next, I'd like to turn to Alhamdu and hear a little bit about your experience in the ClimDev fund that the African Development Bank is supporting, and for the benefit of modernizing Africa's climate and weather observation networks. What are the lessons that you're finding in delivery of this work when it comes to inclusive early warning systems?
Okay, thank you very much. As you mentioned, we are implementing the ClimDev Africa Special Fund, which is a facility under the African Union's ClimDev Africa program. It's a continental program implemented jointly by the African Union Commission, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and the African Development Bank. So this fund is there since 2010, and the objective is to support the modernization of climate services and institutions in Africa. But coming to your question about the lessons we learned over the recent years, let me mention maybe three. The first one is about the data gaps, because there is no early warning system without data. And what we are seeing in Africa is that the access to data is a big issue. Actually, there are recent assessments that have shown that 840 million people in Africa are not covered by early warning systems. This represents 6 out of 10 people in the continent. And when we look at the capacity of national and regional weather institutions in Africa, including regional climate centers, it is estimated that currently Africa's capability is quite limited. It represents 1/8 of the WMO requirements for reporting climate and weather data to the global system. So this is to show the real gap that we have been facing with, despite the effort that we have been putting in place through the ClimDev Special Fund. And another lesson we learned is on financing. And this is close to what my colleague from the World Bank has mentioned on investment. The national weather and hydrological services in Africa are poorly funded, despite their important role on providing, generating data for decision-making and development planning. They do not have yet the necessary capacity to provide real-time data for that purpose. In addition, we know that satellite data also are available, but access to this data is an issue, especially in Africa. And there is also an issue around, granularity of the satellite data that we have on the continent. So financing is key. That's the reason why we at the African Development Bank have committed really to increase our climate financing in the continent. We committed 37.5 billion by 2025, and 25 of that is to be allocated as adaptation, including supporting early warning systems and early actions in Africa. The third lesson we learned is on the need for partnership, because we realize that this is not a task that we can do alone. We need cooperation with other institutions, including WMO, my former organization. I've been working there over, I think, for a couple of years, World Bank and others. And we also need to closely work with the national weather and hydrological services. These are national institutions that have been established and which are mandated to provide the data. We know they don't have the capacity, and through the various mechanisms that are existing, there is really an opportunity to strengthen the capacity of those national institutions, as well as the regional climate centers. In Africa, we have 4 of them in the different regions, and we see that in Eastern Africa, for instance, the capacity is improving thanks to the support of the ClimDev Special Fund. we have been supporting the ICPAC, which is the IGAD Climate Prediction Center. We have also recently created, with partnership with other institutions like WMO, the Regional Center for Central Africa. Actually, this region has not been supported by any weather and climate forecast. So this center is now operational, and it is already assisting countries to generate and communicate climate data. Lastly, on partnerships also, as you know, last year at COP27, the bank has also committed to supporting the Early Warning for All initiative. And we are also part of the SOFT, led by WMO, the Systematic Observations Financing Facility. Actually, we are supporting 9 African countries to develop their national investment plans under the SOFT as part of our role in supporting that initiative in Africa. We have also just operationalized a new fund here at COP28. This is a climate action window. The call for project proposal is out. Largely, we are focusing on adaptation, and we are inviting project proponents to also bring out some initiative on supporting early warning under this new initiative, which is supporting 37 African countries across the continent. Lastly, I believe that the loss and damage fund that has been launched here, capitalized here, is going to also play a role because we know that the needs are huge, and the existing instruments that we have are doing their part, but it is not sufficient. So we know the importance of early warning and early action to avoid losses and damages, and I believe that this new fund could also play a role there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very strong message on the need for finance, capacity building, and partnerships. Great themes that you raise. Now moving to very much the last mile, and Nena, to the work of the IFRC that has really been a leader in piloting early warning, early action, anticipatory and forecast-based approaches. And it'd be great to hear from you, what are the systems that need to be put in place so that early warnings can trigger some of these livelihood and life-saving interventions?
Very much. Again, it's great to be part of this panel and also to partner with UNDRR and others on delivering this. We, as you mentioned, we're leading on Pillar 4 of the Early Warnings for All, and we're very proud of that. This is on the preparedness to respond. We think, as you said, that we are naturally suited to do that because, as you know, we are a network of national societies in 190 countries in the world, present through our volunteers in thousands and thousands of local communities, including the last mile ones. So for us, early warnings and early action, they are designed with communities, for communities, in strong collaboration with national authorities and hydrometeorological services. Many people talk about early warnings, alerts, but we also promote early action because without early action on the basis of early warnings, we will not be saving lives. And I also wanted to mention, I think you said, Patricia, how important it is that this is all done with a sensitivity to a particular community. And this is where the network of IFRC national societies and their volunteers is very well suited because they work in local languages, in local circumstances. They have trust of those local communities, and therefore the messages are understood and well interpreted, even in those communities that are not digitally perhaps connected to various other ways of communicating. Also, my colleague from the World Bank mentioned that some of the people in these communities are disproportionately affected. Very often it's women and children. And I think all those solutions and systems that you mentioned have to involve the thinking of those disproportionately more affected parts of the population. I wanted to mention an example of Bangladesh, which we are very proud of. Years before people were dying when cyclones in Bangladesh hit, last year year, we were very proud of the work of Bangladesh Red Crescent Society. They were able to move 2.5 million people before the cyclone hit and therefore saved so many lives. So in terms of what IFRC will be working on, we will work on forecasts and alerts that consider community risk, vulnerability, and exposure tailored to those communities. We will also deliver alerts that are timely, targeted, understandable, as I said. And then we want to also ensure that those communities are organized, trained, and equipped to act before or after the disaster. I have a lot of thoughts on financing, but I think we are going to get there in the next round.
Thank you very much. And before we return to the panelists, maybe a quick temperature check of all of you in the room. I'd like to put a question to you, and just maybe with a show of hands. How many of you have received an early warning or an alert of an impending weather or climate-related event or hazard? So I'd say more than half. Panelists, hands up. Yeah. Great. Excellent. Thank you very much. Would any of you like to comment on anything you've heard so far before giving the word to the audience? Any of the interventions made? If not,
I just wanted to mention something about financing. I don't know whether the audience will have questions on that. We need a lot of funding to go into this. And as you know, still most of the funding for climate goes into mitigation. And I hope that through the efforts of this COP and advocacy that we are making on the need for climate adaptation, that we are going to get to more funding. Because I believe it's the World Bank estimate that if we put $1 now into prevention and more resilient communities, that we can save up to $7 from response. And we all know where we stand on the overall funding, in particular for humanitarian services. It's just a fraction of what we need, and therefore working on reducing the needs together between or across humanitarian and development organizations is the key for us to be successful at this.
absolutely. Key facts, and we also know the famous, what's it called? A figure, 24 hours notice can reduce damage by 30%. I mean,
exactly.
the figures and facts speak for themselves. I'd like to now turn to the audience and hear from you. Any questions or comments that you'd like to make, and hear more from our speakers who've raised a range of fascinating topics. Any questions? Can bring a mic to you. Yep.
Hi, thank you for the interventions. Very interesting. Stefania Giordini from the Netherlands Red Cross. Working on early warning systems since quite some years, what we notice is that the investment is definitely needed in strengthening the capacity of the institution, like our colleague was saying, in Met agencies. Sometimes, though, there is an imbalance or like just a divide between the agencies that are in charge of meteorological information and agencies that are in charge of hydrological information. And these two types of information are both needed and crucial to have a working early warning system. So I would like to hear a comment from the panelists on this.
Great. Are there any anyone who wants to take that first? Any volunteers? Patricia first, and then I'll turn to the rest of the panel.
And so I could just share the perspective from Kenya and how we do it here. So we are a national hydrometeorological department. So we have what we do mainly is meteorology, but we have a hydrological department as well. But we also work very closely with the Ministry of Water, who also deal directly with the hydrological risks. So I had mentioned co-production earlier. So when we produce forecasts mainly for the long term, we come together with all the relevant ministries, including the Ministry of Water, and we design alerts and warnings based on impacts that they see and that we see coming for the coming season. And then these are disseminated to the specific users. So from our perspective, there is room for improvement, but we already have systems that allow us to co-produce information that takes into account both the hydrological and the meteorological bit for the season and for the month as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Alhamdo, did you want to come in?
That's a very great question. We see that in many countries, actually, in Africa. But I think the issue has been resolved recently with the combination of the two aspects. Most of the time when you go, you see, that's why actually we are calling them national meteorological and hydrological services all together. But still, we see some challenges in terms of working together, really. Although they are sitting under the same umbrella, the coordination is not yet there. So I think they are linked. We need both meteo and also hydro data for early warning system, as well as socioeconomic data, which are missing. So this calls for really coordination across all the institutions. And one thing I want to also comment on is that sometimes there is a disconnect between the institution leading on early warning and those leading on, weather and hydrological services. For instance, in some countries, the early warning agenda is led by the Civil Protection Agency. And if there is no coordination with the Civil Protection Agency and the national Met and hydro services, this early warning system cannot work. So I think there is a real need for multi-sectoral, cross-institutional, coordination in order to ensure that all the key and relevant institutions that we need for early warning and early action come together and provide their inputs. And I see that already happening with the establishment of cross-sectoral, coordination units led by the civil protection agencies, and with the participation with the relevant institutions, including the national meteorological and hydrological services. Thank you.
Thank you. So another interface, not just the users, the recipients and the providers, but also within the providers themselves. Asmita, you wanted to comment as well.
Yeah, so this is great, and this is really at the heart of the early warning, providing proper warning in time. And so across the countries, as both of my colleagues said, there are these big issues in terms of how these different agencies come together and work together. From our experience, we have seen that bringing them together and clarifying roles and responsibilities, and then really helping them also on the ICT side, to make sure that there is a common platform, there is a way to exchange data. Sometimes agencies have data in different format, and they don't even speak to itself. So how do you actually solve that? These are inherent challenges, and that's why I mentioned that it's very important to stay committed and engaged. It takes time for them to build mutual trust, to be able to develop protocols, how to share information and work together. But I think it takes time. It's achievable. Thanks.
Thank you. Erica.
Yes, thank you so much for the question. I don't know is it working?
I think so.
Okay. So on this, one aspect that we worked on in terms of the rollout of early warnings for all in countries is developing a toolkit. So as part of that, we actually have terms of reference for a coordination group, because I think this coordination is really important at the national level. And so there's also a mapping to see if there's already an existing coordination mechanism among all of these different agencies, because really what we're looking at is multi-hazard early warning systems. While there is initially a focus in terms of the hazards that are getting more and more severe with climate change, ultimately we really need to have coordination from all of the different agencies overseeing different elements of the hazards. And I just wanted to mention, so at WMO, we have a longstanding collaboration with ITU, and we have something called the Register of Alerting Authorities. And this is actually a register which in each country, the individual agency that's mandated to issue warnings is registered there. And I think it's important in terms of governance that there's some sort of standard operating procedures that are in place in legal legislation to enhance the coordination of these different sectors and agencies. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I see there's another question on the floor, unless anyone wants to comment on this specific question.
So it's more of a comment. This is Hussam from IFRC. Of course, the coordination and the work with different stakeholders is something very important, but also to bring the legal aspects into perspective here. Like there's a role for the authorities and governments to enable through laws and regulations those early actions or early warning to be reinforced through line ministries. Because, as you mentioned, different public authorities or public boards, like the meteorological offices, if there is no legal base for them to disseminate, it will be very hard, and it will be more based on goodwill initiatives, rather than regulated approach to whom should get the information and who's accountable as well if this information is not disseminated. So it's more of a comment as well around the importance of legal base. And from the IFRC, we work as well through our disaster law programming to help local authorities and national authorities revising their laws as well to be sensitive to the climate smart approach through different initiatives. So just a comment on the legal base aspect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My question is on rather the greatest percentage of the existing early warning systems are largely project funded, either a component within the chain, if not the entire chain. So I'm keen to know from the colleagues from the government, what are some of the sustainability approaches beyond these kind of projects that have largely lifetimes?
So we have a comment on the legal aspects. How do we ensure that accountability is there, access to information, that it gets shared with the relevant people? And then to the point that Patricia also made, how do we move forward from project-funded approaches to capacity building? How do we ensure that what is built is sustainable? Anyone in the panel who'd like to comment on any of those points?
Let me pick, I don't know, let me try the legal question. There are two aspects I see. On the one hand, and I'm sure WMO could comment on that, weather and climate services and data, are regulated through the WMO. I know there are regulations for that. Being public goods, climate data is supposed to be available and made freely available to people. So, and on the other hand, if you regulate it too much, are you not going to limit the access to the data to people or institutions? So I'm just a comment on your comment actually, to see to find the right balance between making climate data available and regulate access, or and I think in some countries there are some regulations being put in place for certain data. There are part of some data that could be made available to the general public, for instance, but there are other kind of data that are critically important for some specific end users, like let's say the aviation sector. I mean, they need also data to get the flights, go. And I think the regulation aspect is key, but it depends on how countries themselves see the use of climate data. On the issue of capacity, I think it's for government, but I want to jump in here. For instance, the national Met services. Some of them, as I said, are really struggling with capacity issues. They don't have funding, and some are actually trying to sell data in order to generate revenues. And this sometimes raises some criticism that are they mandated to to sell climate data. But I think it's, for me, if we need the national Met services to operate optimally, they need to have the right funding, and they need also to generate revenues. And for instance, if they can sell data to the aviation, the airline companies, why not? Because airlines are also making money. So, and this will ensure sustainability also, instead of relying only on public funds, which have become scarce and insufficient. Thank you.
No, I have comments on the same line. So in terms of the legal aspect, beyond early warning system, there is the whole sort of national policy and law on disaster risk management on climate. And many of our projects actually look at that, starting from what are the national laws and policies, what does it mean? Because public safety is a part of local government, state government, national government. But how do you, one aspect is the law, second aspect is how you are implementing it. And so that really is a heart of issue, and many projects go beyond just the warning system to look at the whole value chain of identifying what risks are there, how to mitigate those climate and disaster risks, and then also provide, making sure that the warning system exists, and then if there is any residual risk, making sure that perhaps insurance or other ways are there, for example, social safety nets. So really looking at the entire chain. On the second question on the sustainability side, this is very important. Many of the MDBs and partners, we do work in different projects. The bank is trying to move away from project, and we are also trying to coordinate with other MDBs and partner. We have an instrument, what's called multi-phase project, a programmatic approach. So it engages with the government over 15 years, 3 or 4 different cycles of projects, so that there is technical capacity building. But in the end, as my colleague said, it's really about having dedicated budget from the national government for all these agencies so that they can continue to work, which is a challenge in many of our countries in Africa and South Asia. And there is an issue in terms of developing their revenue sources. I wouldn't say selling the data, even though that happens some places, but selling the services to the agriculture field or to the aviation sector, which can then make these agencies more self-sustainable. But again, these are public goods, and there has to be a provision at the national level to have dedicated budget, not only for the functioning, maintenance, but also technical capacity building and staff. Yes.
Thank you. Nena and then Patricia.
I agree with my colleagues that commitment of national authorities is extremely important for sustainability of this type of things, but it's also the capacity of both national authorities and local actors who are involved in this system of provision, early warnings and early action is also very important. And my sense is that we are not investing enough in building that capacity. And there are multiple initiatives, multiple projects, whether it's the World Bank or something that gets funded to us, but somehow I don't think that we pull it together in a way that will ensure that sustainability. And I'm sorry, I want to put Honduras National Society on the spot here. When we were hosted in Honduras with a group of donors, we saw communities that are taken out of their homes time and time again. And humanitarian actors cannot solve that problem. There is a need for sustainable infrastructure. In this case, river was overflowing. So there has to be bigger investment in some of the infrastructure projects to then allow for humanitarian organizations to do their bit as well. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that we keep having the same problem time and time again, but humanitarian assistance, humanitarian funding, and even the good capacity of the humanitarian organization is not enough to solve the problem. So how do we pull it all together so that we have sustainable or resilient roads and houses and communities overall? I think it requires a packaged multi-stakeholder approach.
Absolutely.
My colleagues have really spoken a lot on the sustainability issue, and so I'll just provide an example of what we've done in the past. So we had a project that ran 5 years, and through part of the project, we developed a new product at the sub-seasonal timescale, and we were targeting 2 specific sectors, energy and agriculture. And this project we tried to build in sustainability right from the beginning. And so what we did, we demonstrated the economic benefit to the energy sector and the agricultural sector from using tailored products that we did with them. And so when the project was coming to an end, we asked them, have you seen the value of the 4 years, and would you like to continue to receive the same information? And for both of them, the answer was yes. And so they were willing to fund us to acquire data to be able to continue these products. So like as Miti mentioned, selling services is one way that we can be able to increase sustainability. So now we have access to data, our capacity was built, and we can continue providing that information to these particular sectors. Yeah.
Thank you for that illustrative example. Erica.
Just in terms of the data question, so WMO also just recently passed their unified data policy, which is aiming to support countries in exchanging key weather and climate variables to enhance the quality of forecasts worldwide. I think the challenges and what we're working with our members on is how, whenever you start to share this data, how do you co-create some of the services, and how do you brand that? Because it's really important that we have the engagement from our partner institutions like, IFRC, but also FAO. How do we actually create services that also reflect the critical data that underlies the information that's being provided? So we're looking at how we can better make sure that the national meteorological and hydrological services are referenced whenever there's a service provided. So that actually enhances and encourages them to share their data more openly.
Thank you very much. Do we have more questions from the audience? Or comments even? Please, I'll just bring the mic over.
Thanks a lot. I'm Alexei from Honduran Red Cross. Thank Nina to bring on the table the mitigation topic. And because from our perspective, we continue working on the symptom, if you permit me the analogy, but working on adaptation, I mean. I would like to hear from you if you have any comment on that, because until now we are working harder, and we will do it. Working on adaptation, but what about mitigation? To connect, as many of you said, to connect with development, to connect them with resilience, to connect really with the real solutions.
I don't have a question. I just hold the microphone.
I think we need it back, actually. We need the mic back here. So there was a question on links to mitigation. Does anyone want to take that one on?
So I understand mitigation is more in terms of the resilience aspects, right? That's not really carbon mitigation. Yeah, so that is the most important thing. And as climate is changing, obviously we are seeing more and more of these events. And, we can get into a situation where disaster is happening like every other month. And we see that in many of the, I worked in Africa also for a long time, 8-9 years, working with the new disaster management agencies, and they were just totally involved. One disaster happened, next happened, and you're just totally on it. But how do we move out of that? And this is where actually the World Bank is spending a lot of resources. We have close to 35% of our entire financing going towards climate risk mitigation. We want to track our finance for climate goals. So looking at, how do you assess risk? So not just the risk of now, but also future risk. Understanding, how the climate change will affect flooding, for example, more heat events, and, other kind of impacts in, agriculture, other sectors, and really come up with that mitigation plan, work with the governments. Each of the government are taking their own steps, but there is a long way to go, right? It's a process that takes time. So you identify the risk in each of the sectors, also in terms of different hazard, identify which sectors governments are working on it, develop that financing plan, and there is a huge financing need. So you talked about having resilient houses and roads and infrastructure. All of them require finance. And so how do you actually get that? Plus, how do you actually develop different ways of working? There are ways in which bridges and roads, et cetera, are built, but how do you make sure that there's a climate angle to it, there is a disaster angle to it, so they stay intact in a disaster event. They can function for more time. They are planned in a more climate resilience fashion. So the whole idea of understanding risk, developing risk mitigation action, implementing them, learning from them is critical. And I think that's where most of our projects are focusing. Early warning response are a part of it. But definitely, it's a bigger agenda, and it takes a long-term commitment and engagement.
And that links very well with what Nena was saying before around linking up efforts, whether it's on climate resilient infrastructure, making sure that we're not just responding time and time again to the same hazards and breaking out of that cycle. Do we have any questions? Please.
I just wanted to also mention, so WMO, I believe it was on Tuesday, launched the decadal report. So I think it's really how we look at our planning in relation to some of the climate models. And I think like better connecting this with policy making and investments is really key to this.
Thank you. I was struck by something that Patricia said earlier on in the discussion around producing good forecasts that weren't necessarily being acted upon, they weren't going to the people. And I wondered, we hear a lot about technological advances, being able to produce forecasts quicker, cheaper, AI, increased computational power. Are there opportunities for those advances to also enhance the inclusivity side, the accessibility, that it works for everyone in society, the varied needs that people have? Are we seeing that being applied?
Yeah, we do, but for that you have to have connectivity, right? If you don't have connectivity, those technological advancements cannot deliver what they can deliver in a country like Kenya. But what we are seeing is, and to me that's the most powerful aspect of technology and technological platforms, is that we can have the voice of the impacted communities through those platforms. They can register their needs, they can even provide feedback on whether their needs are satisfied. You can monitor, you can track it, you can aggregate it. There is something very powerful if we can have connectivity to then use this technology to even collect data and get the feedback on the services that are provided to those communities.
Patricia, and then Alhamdu.
So in Kenya, we use WhatsApp. It's technology, and it's the really simplest one available. And so communities are able to tell us and give us feedback. So we have a platform where we've named it impact-based forecasting. So we provide the forecast, and they tell us the impacts. So this helps us to design thresholds for them in coming seasons. So we are really leveraging that. It doesn't look like big technology, but it really works for us at that level.
That I think, is it working? Okay. That, there are two sides, the supply side and the demand side. And especially on the demand side, this is where we really need to leverage the existing ICT, technologies. And I think in Africa, for instance, I see a combination of both traditional means of, providing information and also the use of new technologies. For instance, I saw in Mauritania a few years ago, the Med Service has established a system, just a color code, on the sea, especially for fishermen when they go to fish, depending on the status of the sea. Red, you cannot go. Yellow, you go, but you need to understand there are risks. And then green, you can go. So this is really, for them it's easy to understand. So this is to say that we need to also come up with solutions that can be easily understood by the users. On the use of new technologies, we see that also, sending weather information by SMS is also a powerful tool of reaching people. So I believe, just to conclude, that we need to tailor the information based on the needs of the end users. If it is a decision maker, a minister or of planning, the kind of information the minister needs to make decisions is certainly different from the kind of information you make available to the general public, for instance. So I think there is some work in terms of ensuring what kind of information we need to make available and what tools we need to channel the information to the end users.
Tailored solutions can be simple solutions as well. Please.
Just to note that as part of the Early Warnings for All initiative, we, WMO and ITU also facilitate an AI group that works across the pillars. And so as a part of this group, we have Microsoft and Google actively engaged. And so we're really discussing within each of the multi-hazard early warning system pillars, what innovations could yield the greatest benefit. So I would just like to say that, of course, AI has been long used for enhancing forecasts. We actually just had last week an Early Warnings for All AI session with ECMWF, who is leading a lot of the European forecasts. So that is a very active space, but I think there's a lot of areas where we could actually really enhance the support and connection to vulnerable communities. So one specific example, and I believe it's next month, Microsoft is going to be joining us in Ethiopia, and we'll be exploring how can we actually collect the data through AI to better have the impact data, to validate the impact data from different hazards. And so we're looking at building databases in terms of vulnerability and the impacts along with the hazards. And this will actually really enhance our capabilities for issuing impact-based warnings. So that's a space that we're really interested in and optimistic about.
Thank you very much. I see some hands up.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Veronica from Australian Red Cross. I just wanted to go back to the comment about getting information out, good forecasts, technology advancing, and maybe the response not always being what is expected. And I wonder how much of that goes back to the financing question. And for a community, particularly the last mile, to be able to take action, to turn that early warning into early action, there needs to be investment right down at that level as well. And I don't know how much you have seen the lack of investment for preparedness, for pre-positioning, for all of those readiness steps to be able to act being an impediment, and how much that's being thought about as you're thinking about those sort of supply chains of financing from national right down to last mile.
Please, Asmita.
Exactly, this is what I was going to say, that there's a lot of investment in hydromet agencies in terms of improving forecasts, using technologies, but the last mile work in terms of preparedness, more investment is needed there. And it's not like you work with communities when the house is on fire, right? You have to start much earlier in advance. You have to work with local community groups and really identify, because it's not homogeneous community. There are different groups, distinct challenges that need to be taken care of. As a part of one of the projects, we went to New Orleans, for example, to learn their inclusive system. And we realized that they have this area of working with identifying at-risk people first. Who are they? People with disability, elderly people, and really working with them over the year, making sure that where they are, they can get the warning in time. And that kind of system would require more sort of investment and working with the government. We also knew in this, at least with the MDBs and the work we are doing, really improving this preparedness side is relatively new. There are not many consultancies, not many research in terms of exactly how to go about it. How do you match that with the technological advances which is happening? And we need to be very careful. You can work with all these new technology, but if there was a wrong warning is given, people are not then trusting it. Or if you don't give warning, for whatever reason, if technology fails and there is no warning, and people rely on technology to get warning, this is also bad. So how do you bring that balance? How do you make sure that the communities are really at the forefront of understanding the risk they are in and really preparing for it? It's a bigger job. Thanks.
Go ahead.
A more general comment, I fully agree with you. Overall, humanitarian sector is underfinanced in comparison to development. I think we have to admit that. And humanitarian sector so far has, in my mind, has not been so able to articulate the resilience work that has to be done at the last mile communities. The better we get at articulating that, the better we will be able to tap into some other pots of funding that in the past were not available to humanitarian actors. And we're trying to look at development pockets of various governments that traditionally have not been supporting that work at the local community level. We're trying to come up with collaborative models with development banks who actually can understand the resilience language, but perhaps not some other language that humanitarian organizations have used. So in our case, in the case of IFRC, we have come up with a global climate resilience platform for the next 5 years that will be implemented in 100 countries most vulnerable to climate, specifically using that language. And the first pillar of that platform, for which we are fundraising and already have some programs under implementation, is on early warnings and early action. And we found that when we articulate that need at the local level, that we can tap into different types of funds that normally would not be available to us. That's why it's important really to link us all along that chain.
As part of this, as part of the last mile community, I think in Africa, our focus at the African Development Bank now is on the smallholder farmers. They are key stakeholders, but we know the importance of those stakeholders especially on the food production space, and we know that they are facing with several challenges in terms of climate risk, especially when there is drought. They have issues in terms of accessing, the markets to sell their products. So we have a new initiative we call Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program. So the program is supporting countries, but one important priority in the program is to provide digital climate forecast to smallholder farmers. The objective is to reach 30 million of them by 2025, and we are already doing that in many countries. So the whole objective is to make sure that they have the right information for them to improve productivity. And if you don't do that, you are not able to reach this important component of the communities which are playing an important role in food production in Africa. So I think I agree with you. We need to really target those communities, understand their needs of information, and make the information available to them, especially in this very critical moment of climate impacts in all of those countries.
One more point from my side. I do agree that this is Pillar 4 tends to be underfunded. I do think that, especially in fragile contexts, it's really important that there are cash transfer systems set up, because I believe that within the community, they know how to protect themselves. So I think that if we could facilitate just to everybody in the room, if it's possible to prioritize funding for cash transfers, especially in vulnerable and fragile states, I think this is actually a very key solution.
We have a question over there.
Thanks, Elina. I'm Cinzia Luceno from the European Investment Bank, and I take this opportunity to thank all the panelists and the audience for coming to this event today. I have two questions. One for the non-MDB panelists. My question to you is, how can MDB really contribute further to support early warning systems? Where would our finance be better placed? And the second question is for the NDB panelists. And to you, I would like to ask, how can we better collaborate to really scale up finance for early warning systems? Thank you.
Who wants to start?
Yeah, I could start. And this is building up on a conversation we've been having the whole of last week. WMO, DRR launched the Systematic Observation Financing Facility. As you know, currently it only serves LDCs and SIDS. And there's still a great need within the rest of the developing countries to improve observational capacities for the climate system. So that is one place where funding is needed to increase the scope of the SOF to serve more than just LDCs and SIDS. And then another thing is in co-designing research. So a lot of research and projects already have, that come onto the continent, for example, in Africa, they've predetermined what they want to do. But I feel working together to co-design research and to co-design funding enables the greatest benefits to be found, because then we can be able to tell you what are the exact needs that we have and how can we work together to fill those needs.
Follow on to that as a non-MDB now, in the past, very much MDB. To me, I fully agree with you. I mean, we sometimes go and ask MDBs for funding, but we don't co-create solutions together. We need to think together and then work together. And even if we fund it completely separately, right, but at least in an aligned way, and where the alignment is going to come from, it will come from national plans, from local plans, from community plans, because I cannot possibly see how an MDB will provide funding that will ultimately go to the very last mile community. That's impossible. An MDB will use a government as a conduit for its funding. It can support this resilient infrastructure that we were talking about, which ultimately will connect those communities somehow, where we can then play a role in terms of spreading the alerts, translating them for the communities, talking about moving people around, etc. I mean, it has to be all connected. Right now it isn't, because we work in an isolation. Every now and then we come up with something really great together, but I don't think that we co-create together. We more look for funding from MDBs, and I don't think that that's possible given the different modalities that MDBs use to channel their funding.
Yeah, I think I totally agree in terms of working together. It's critical. There is a need to scale up the work that is already happening. We know that the inclusive early warning systems deliver results, and the goal is achievable. So we really need to work together. But the World Bank and I think the other MDBs also work within the purview of a country, right? So it has to be a country-led process. World Bank has, for example, country partnership framework where we work with the government to identify in the coming 3 to 5 years, what are the investment priorities. And I think that's where MDBs can come together, work with country, identify priorities, and work together in terms of, there is a need for all of us to stay engaged. One MDB is good in one, the other MDBs are sort of needed in other aspect. And so how we can all come together, perhaps in a country platform context, and not just look at the early warning system side of it, but the entire value chain in terms of the climate commitment, the mitigation, adaptation angles which are needed, but also in terms of the warning and last mile connectivity. So yeah, that's a real call in terms of doing what we are doing already, but also scaling it up and improving our partnerships.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the question. Is it working now? Okay. Yeah, so I think that in terms of like some of the key areas and priorities, yes, as Patricia mentioned, we have existing financing mechanisms and we have really good experience working with the World Bank and others through the cruise initiative. So I think that this is actually a modality that we could try to scale up. And I think it's really, in terms of solving the issue of sustainability, we, like at WMO, there are different global centers, regional centers, and then all of this information should be, in theory, cascading to the national. So I think that reinforcing that, but also making sure that it's not kind of doing it top down and also bottom up is really, really important to make sure that the information is actually benefiting at the national level. And I think that in terms of like key ways to engage in the coming year, we are going to have these multi-stakeholder platforms, which are going to be combined jointly with the regional platforms. And then, so this would be another opportunity for us to better discuss on a regional level some of our key priorities and key ways of working together with the existing financing streams, and also if there are new investments to be programmed. So I would just encourage you to follow that space, and hopefully we can engage further there.
Just to add my voice to the MDB question, and I know I'm going to leave in 5 minutes because I have another panel in the other side. I think first it's important that we work together with the view of avoiding duplication, and also working with, building on our comparative advantages as well as on existing frameworks. There are existing frameworks that, facilitate MDB's work, and I think, especially when we operate in the same countries, we always come together, especially when we co-finance projects. So co-financing is key. And this can be done based on our comparative advantage. Lastly, I think we MDBs, we tend to work largely with governments, which is fine. I think we need now to go down also, work with local communities. Municipalities are also asking how can they be supported on various areas we are working on, including on that one. So I think there is a need to also for MDBs to also, address this last mile issue that was raised today.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Thank you. Fabio Menten from the French Development Agency. I would be interested in hearing a little bit more on the role the private sector could play in early warning system, besides providing connectivity and all, if you could expand on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. No, this interesting question, and I'm going to respond to it from the data supply side. We see that private sectors in some countries are already generating data from various sources, and there is a sort of competition between them and the public institutions working on those. So the role of private sector is key, we know that, but is it their role is not to duplicate what the public institutions are doing. So I think I don't have an answer to it, but I believe in when there is a cross institutional framework in a country, private sector should be there, and I think there is a dialogue to ensure that they play the role, maybe not necessarily in the supply side, but also at the demand side, when we know that companies also need climate services. How can we tailor services that are able to respond to those to their demands? Companies need information on various issues, so I see the role at that level. In addition, but in some countries when there is a gap for public institutions to generate data, we see them already filling the gap, but I don't think this is the role to do that. But if the capacity is there, we can support. The role of private sector should be especially on the use of services rather than in the production of climate services. Thank you.
Somewhat different take. They can also finance some of this, right? They can be on the user side, but what about insurance companies getting involved? What about coming up with some mechanisms and modalities where private sector, especially pension funds, insurance companies who are interested in CSR, can actually fund this? And we have some interesting examples, including in IFRC, where we're experimenting with insurance companies on commercially viable structures for DRR.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I think this is actually a challenge because I find that there are often, at least within our members, instances where services are started, they've been leveraging private sector to provide services. But then at some point, the project funding ends and then they are really requested to pay for those services and it's no longer possible. So I think how we work with the private sector is very important. And I think in terms of, like, maybe one good example that I would have is the discussions that we're having with Microsoft in terms of actually storing information in these large satellite data sets in their cloud. And then through the Cruise SWIO project, we actually have developed an API which can essentially just zip out an element of the model and then provide it to the country. So that it means that you don't really necessarily have to have an incredible bandwidth to receive this information. And so it's a really a nice solution. So something we would like to scale up.
Great. I might actually, in the interest of everyone getting to your next meeting, unless there are any final questions, just to ask the panelists for one key takeaway before we wrap up, one message that you'd like to give to the MDBs that are convening our meeting today, or to your other partners, one key message from this discussion, and then we'll give you an extra 10 minutes maybe to chat amongst ourselves or head to our next meeting.
Do I start? Okay. So I'd like to start first by appreciating all the efforts that are already being done to support inclusive early warning and the efforts that are done to support actually national systems to deliver that. And I will reiterate that working together is what is best and very important because we do not have the money, we have the local knowledge, the banks have the money. So if we work together, then we will be able to provide services that reach the last mile. So that would be my message.
I think the MDBs can help us that early warning, early action is deeply rooted in on the priorities of the national governments and in the relevant legislation. And they can also help us find that kind of the whole chain from supporting the resilient infrastructure to actually delivering early warnings to last mile communities, those underprivileged ones, and doing it in a I would say, a culturally sensitive way wherever we are, and that's what the humanitarian sector can provide, but we cannot work up the chain.
Yeah, I would, first of all, I really want to thank you for organizing and inviting us. It has been a very informative session. So one takeaway is really in terms of scaling up the investment and the work that we are all doing and really doing it in a more collaborative and partnership manner, working together to achieve this goal. Definitely there is a way to involve private sector. There's a lot to be done there. Private sector is actually affected by disaster, about not receiving warning, but we have not been really very good in involving them at each sector, each point of this whole chain. So perhaps doing more there is also something to look forward to. But thanks again. This has been a pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks. I think it has been a very great idea to have that session. And in my view, early warning for all by 2027, I think is quite ambitious. But so for that to happen, we really need everybody on the table. So collaboration is key. But I believe also that we need to come up with innovative approaches in order to deliver early warning. We have been seeing what is happening already in the past. It didn't work, so it's time really to find out what works better depending on country context and specific locations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again for organizing this session, and it's been a pleasure to share the stage with all of you. I think in terms of maybe building on what you just said, I think the Early Warnings for All initiative actually is a very ambitious challenge, but I also think this is something that's absolutely critical in terms of, just human rights. So even if it is ambitious, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you land in the stars. So I really hope we can all work together in the coming years to make this a reality.
Thank you ever so much to our wonderful panelists. I'd like to just thank all of you on behalf of the EIB and the MDB Working Group on Adaptation Finance. It's a pleasure to have had you here. And I guess going to the one-word challenge of summarizing all that you've said, I'm going to go for one word: co-creation. I think that sums up a lot of the themes that we've talked about today. Thank you ever so much, and we hope to keep the conversation going in the future as well. Thank you.